Welcome back to another episode of The Alarmists. The title of this episode is Let Freedom Ring, and this is part 2 of last week's episode. And what we're going to be doing today, I have some key players in the media and the press to discuss what it was like the last 4 years to be in the media, to be a member of the press, and to get into the issues that we think will help to restore the truth, because every single day for the last 4 years, the truth was assaulted from all sides. Here are my guests for The Alarmists. Let Freedom Ring, part 2. Come on board, everybody. We're going to do a quick walkthrough, and I'm going to introduce everyone. Below me, on the side of me, should I say, is acclaimed on-air personality, radio jock, George Flowers. He's on CBS, he's on ABC. He was the voice of New York One. He was the man who did the news for Howard 100's news channels, Howard Stern. Welcome, George Flowers. Nice to see you.
Hello. Hi. Nice to be here. Good to see everybody.
I have above the great Bill Boggs, producer extraordinaire, on-air personality from the great talk show Confidential, Midday Live, the producer of Morton Downey Jr., and so much more. One of the great interviewers.
The book. Don't forget the book.
That's right. The book. The book's. Tell everybody about the book. Just say the name of the book.
You don't know it by this point.
The
Wonder Dog is told to Bill Boggs.
I know. That's why I want you to. It's your book.
Essential reading if you're interested in this subject.
Yes, it is, because it's about being politically correct and incorrect and a whole lot more. We've got Andy Riegel, who is the executive producer of video content for Wall Street Journal. Andy and I know each other all the way back from the Morton Downey Jr. days. I hate to admit that. But it was actually, you know what, when we look back at Mort, it was actually something to behold now because of the freedom of speech that we had back then. We have hypnotist Jeffrey Rose. He's going to come on a little bit later to give us his point of view about, welcome, Jeffrey, about what we see on the news and how it affects our judgment, our vote, and the things that we do each day in our lives. We have Brad Balfour, who I know since the beginning of my career, another extraordinary journalist, has written for everybody from Spin Magazine, Rolling Stone. This man is a culturist who knows the mind of celebrity, who talks the truth every day, and we always talk quite a bit about all that stuff. Welcome, Brad Balfour.
Hello, everybody.
And then to add a little depth, I have an actual viewer, someone that I know very well, named Scott Levy, who is a voracious watcher of the news. He knows what's going on out there. And I want Scott at the end, after we all speak, to chime in on what he's seeing and if he agrees or disagrees with the things that we talk about. And right now, I'm going to bring us in. I want to read something that I found very, very interesting. Let me get this here, because I thought it was very, very important to establish the tone of what we're going to be talking about today. In November 2017, the International Center for Journalists gave Fox News' Chris Wallace an award for excellence in journalism. In his acceptance speech, he noted that President Trump's attacks on the media threatened democracy. But then he pivoted to scold his peers. Even if Trump is trying to undermine the press for his own calculated reasons, Wallace said, when he talks about bias in the media, unfairness, I think he has a point. Wallace listed examples of recent Trump coverage that made him very uncomfortable. A CBS Evening News intro referring to presidential statements divorced from reality. A tweet from the New York Times reporter asking, would you keep working for a boss who consistently refuses to distance himself from virulent acts of racists, anti-Semites, and white supremacists? Wallace warned that journalists should approach their work as umpires, objective witnesses to what's going on. He added, we shouldn't be drawn into becoming players on the field trying to match the people we cover in invective. It's not our role. What I want to know, and I want everyone's opinion one at a time, is objectivity morally inadequate? Let's start with Bill Boggs.
What do you want to know, Jesse? What is it specifically?
Is objectivity in the media morally inadequate?
Is it inadequate?
Yes, morally inadequate.
Well, I guess sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. That's, a general question. There, in all coverage of everything, there are going to be mistakes and there are going to be biases. Some media outlets are, far more biased than others. That would be my answer. Yeah, sure there is.
And is there a remedy in your eyes on how we can, how we can fix that, how we can make it, adequate? Because, I think that
I have no idea. I have no idea. It's so complicated. To me, the big issue that we're facing today is a simple fact that there's no common sense of facts in our culture, in our society. You may be talking about a news outlet here, a news outlet there, and how they may be really, trumpeting things that aren't, no pun intended, aren't true. But the much larger question, in my opinion, it was addressed by Thomas Friedman in his editorial today, is the effect of cyberspace and the internet on what truth is and what truth isn't. The very trial that's going on in the Senate as we speak now is about the truth. It essentially, so what was the truth? Did Trump win the election? Probably not, based on the facts. But a lot of people said he did. And so that look at that. If you just think that here in the United States of America, a high percentage of people do not think Trump actually won the election. Start with that. Biden actually won the election. Start with that, okay? And figure, how would you solve something like that? That's a giant social issue that, in my opinion, is way more important than media bias in some ways or another.
All right, now you have a great point, and I want to bring George into this. So many people believe that, 74 million, a big group of those believe that the election was stolen from Trump. But the problem is that, we have a belief system that counters that. So the question I have to ask, is Trump the problem, or is Trump the symptom of a problem, which is much greater than what we are dealing with? Because for so many people to sit there and deny the outcome, to say that there's conspiracy theories, to say that, all these inadequacies happen when none of it can be backed up by actual proof, to me says that there's something bigger going on. George, what's your take on that?
All right, let's go back about what would that be? About 80 or so years, 90 years. Let's go back to Goebbels. Let's go back to the Nazis in Germany. And one very simple approach that Goebbels had as the minister of propaganda was that if you tell a lie enough times, you've all heard this, it becomes a fact. So if you have an audience that is glued to one source of information, that source of information is carrying the lies that are being told that they hope will eventually be seen as fact by the population, then that group is going to believe, because they don't have any countering information, they don't look for it, they're not open to it. It's that whole confirmation bias issue. They look for what they want to hear, and then that just reinforces what they believe. Then you're going to have a condition in the society where people have been brainwashed basically by one kind of news, conservative news, far right news, and so on, that simply blocked out information from the other side. They don't even know that information exists. So
okay, so that's a great point. So let me segue with this. I'm going to read something here that I thought is very, very important. Within 48 hours, Trump's first of his being elected and the whole inauguration taking place, Trump's first press secretary, Sean Spicer, had set the tone for his and his successors' antagonistic relationship with the press corps by blatantly lying about the inaugural crowd size. And the senior advisor, and this is where it really makes me cringe, Kellyanne Conway, had coined the phrase alternative facts that would come to define the administration's relationship with the truth. So I'm going to segue to Andy Riegel. Andy, how important, and being that you work for the Wall Street Journal, which is considered a place to read the truth, how important is the truth in politics?
Well, I think the truth in politics is important, but I think what we're talking about here, when you started the show about objectivity, it's really about commercial enterprise and not much more. I've worked at MSNBC, I've worked at CNBC, worked at the Wall Street Journal, and while certainly objectivity is important, but the people at the highest levels are trying to figure out, how do we provide the most information at any given moment to the greatest population? That's what they care about. My wife and my daughter, as a teenager, are always asking me, why are they covering the same things over and over again? And that's because they want to get the largest audience at any given moment. So while they are in their own way trying to get it right from their perspective, they're just trying to feed their audiences the information at any given time that the largest audience will watch or read or interact.
Doesn't this feed into what George just said about, if you say a lie over and over again, eventually people believe it to be truth?
Well, and to the point that a lot of people are focused on one type of instrument to get their news, but it's not so much about objectivity. There's no such thing as objectivity. You know, people used to say, oh, Walter Cronkite, he's so trustworthy, or Dan Rather. No, they're reading a prompter that was written, a script, by somebody who was making $40,000 a year from somebody in the field who was making $60,000 a year. So it's really the people who are producing the news who are determining what you see at any given moment. So, and like, I was at the Wall Street Journal for 6 years, and I never had anybody tell me what to write or how to write it. I determined, and I was overseeing video, I determined what stories we told. And
who watched over you? I mean, you had a legal team. They have to look at it, of course.
Well, yes. I mean, I reported to the editor-in-chief, but still, I was making the decision. He couldn't keep up with the 200 videos I produced a week.
But what about legal? They have to, when you have a controversial subject, the legal department has to look through the video to approve it, don't they?
Sure, that was 1 out of every 50 videos.
So things got through the cracks. It was an imperfect situation, I would guess.
Yeah, and when we had a controversial circumstance or something that needed to be vetted by we had an ethics czar.
Give an example of like a video that you had to put out that was very controversial, that went through the rigmarole before it was allowed to go on the air.
I'm trying to think of a specific instance. It would be something to the effect where we're dealing with a company and we might have been saying something controversial about that company. We had to make sure that we were not going to get sued. And so I'd have to go through the ethics czar to make sure that, that we weren't putting ourselves in any vulnerable situation, that we were following the ethics of the Wall Street Journal. And this, I was in the ethics czar's office quite often, just to make sure that we weren't putting ourselves in a situation where we could be sued. But so everyone gets caught up in, Rupert Murdoch's controlling the media or whatever. But
George Soros.
Yeah, but just like Walter Cronkite wasn't objective, he's just reading words on a teleprompter.
Why is he so revered if he's just a puppet?
Because people are naive, because people don't know any better. They in those days, they thought he was the person coming into your home telling you things. He's a wise guy. He did his own reporting. He covered the world. But when he's sitting there in New York in a studio, he's reading other people's words. That's all he's doing.
So when he's saying that's the way it was, it may not have been that's the way it was?
It's the way it was by the 200 producers and writers and so forth, and senior producers and executive producers who put the news together. And all I'm saying is that I'm not sure why we're going for objectivity. And in fact, that's why the cable.
Well, what should we be going for then?
Well, opinion's great. I mean, it's much more entertaining. It's much more entertaining to watch people giving their opinion, which they never used to do on cable. Now that's all they do for the most part.
But it takes so long. Like George told me, it was a very interesting text he sent me. He said it becomes exhausting for the viewer to find out the truth. They got to switch so many channels. They got to read every newspaper they can get their hands on. They got to scour the internet, and they don't know what the truth is.
But they don't. But the producers of that content don't care if you have to go to other sources. All they want to know is if their job is to get 2 million people to watch at any given moment, that's what they're going to do. And it doesn't matter to them that you may feel like to get to the truth, you have to go elsewhere. They don't care. They just want their 2 million people so that then they can serve ads to those 2 million people and get a bonus and a promotion and keep their jobs. That's what they care about. And that's not to say it's not to the exclusion of doing good journalism, but we don't care about the fact that you might have to go elsewhere because we're watching the same story about the impeachment or Giuliani or Trump or whatever for the 8th hour in a row. They don't care.
So, fellas, all right. So, Brad, I want to ask you. So, we all know that politicians lie. I mean, this is the joke between all of us when we talk about political people, that they lie. And right now, I mean, Trump is no different, other than he lied more than the other ones did. Where did Brad go?
Well, bear with me.
Okay. So we know that politicians lie, but was Trump's behavior, a reflection of how America is? Is America's behavior, is that a symptom of what, is Trump a symptom of what America is? The cavalier attitude towards the pandemic, the march on the Capitol building. I mean, there is a behavioral issue here that I want to examine, because this has been there even before Trump. Maybe this is why Trump got elected. What's your take on it, Brad?
Well, as to the conditions of things now, first of all, Trump was not elected. 74 million people voted for him. Of those 74 million people, I don't think that those people that were in the Capitol were the larger portion of those people. And I think that Trump reflects a situation where you can't say all politicians lie. You can't say all media is distorted and all media is biased. Otherwise, you play right into the hands of those kind of demagogues like Trump, who exploit that feeling of disconnect. We need to get back to finding in ourselves what we're anchored in, what our values are, and work from that. Just to finish the thought, I feel that what's important is that we have to get anchored into the things that were our core values in the first place. And I think one of the problems we have here is that Trump knew how to exploit creating this disconnect. And he used that to his favor because he doesn't have anything else to base it on. He's uneducated. He doesn't know what he's talking about half the time. He spews things that he wants to believe because he wants to believe them. And I think that we need to get anchored in what our values are and how we should look at things from our own belief system.
All right, very well put. Now, Scott Levy, now you're the viewer. You're the guy, you've listened to all these commentaries. So I want to know, you, the viewer, what are you seeing out there? You watch the news every day. You read the paper like all of us. You grab your coffee and talk your conspiracy theories, I'm sure, at the breakfast table. What are you seeing out there? And do you agree with what's been said in this?
What do I see out there? I see what's been espoused just now. There's too much out there. Where do you go to? There's the left people have their stuff. The right people have their stuff. There's just so much information that has been given to us that it's an overload. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day where I had to shut off after a while, especially with what's going on now. Over the last 4 years, you've been given and we've been fed something that Trump is very good at, by playing people, by forcing situations and repeating it over and over again. Jesse, you said it yourself. If it's said a number of times, it's going to be true. The other thing is, how do you know what is true out there anymore? Over the years, even it was just mentioned that things are said to make people read more or be brought in for their advertisers or something like that. Well, even if stuff is being force-fed today or things are being told that people want you to believe in, didn't we have that in the Vietnam era as well? When we always thought that the news was actually legitimate at that point? How many lies were told during that era as well? So it's something
what makes it any different now, or is it any different? How about Bill? I mean, where do you see that? That's an interesting comment. We've been lied to all along. Bill, what do you think?
Well, I tell you, I was just sitting here thinking, which I rarely do, We're talking about where are we getting the truth. Personally speaking, for the most part, I read the New York Times, I read the New York Post, I watch PBS, I watch the nightly news, and I don't feel like the information I'm getting from those sources is not factual, frankly. Now, if you move over to the cable networks and the places where they're essentially giving more opinion to validate the affirmations of their audience, which is the economic model that Andy was talking about, then you mix up facts with what the truth is. For the most part, I have no problem feeling when I'm reading about a report of something that's going on in India, or I'm reading about the Chicago mayor having problems with violence and the number of deaths and stuff like that. I don't sit there reading thinking, is this true? I kind of accept it. Now, maybe I'm naive. One of the big change in the last 2 decades has essentially been the true tribalization of American politics, and people wanting to mostly watch what they agree with to get confirmation of and because it makes them feel good. It makes them feel like they're part of something that is important, and they're agreeing with them. So when you're in that area, it's easy to shift from, say Fox News right over to MSNBC. It's instant. You instantly see the difference. But that's commentary. That should not be seen as facts. That should be seen as opinions.
Now, George, you are a newscaster. You read the news. You're the expert here because you're the one who has to disseminate all that information. What are you seeing? Has it changed since you've been doing it for decades? What have you seen change in the way that you report that news?
Well, I've been doing it for half a century, a little bit more than. And look, what's changed is you have so many sources now. Back in the 1960s, when I came up and began doing news, you didn't have that many. You had NBC, ABC, CBS, you had the New York Times, you had your local papers and so on. Today, what do you have? You have, endless sources of news that you can tap into. I begin my day, and everybody has their routine. Bill, you were talking about some stuff as well. What do you do when you begin your day? I look at the AP. I get an AP news wire, which comes to my phone. What's happening? What is the AP saying? Do I doubt what they're saying? No. I used to work for UPI as a newscaster and an editor. So I trust that the people who are gathering that news have given me information that is accurate. I go with that. I go with the New York Times, which we get in hard copy. I go with the Washington Post, which is online.
But those are all left
and
wing. Is there
I wouldn't say they're. Is there? Well, you got to keep on going. That's not where I stop. I'm also at Newsy. I'm also at Newsmax. I'm also looking at Fox, of course. You got to go back and forth. You got to weigh what's there. Bill was talking before about confirmation bias. Yeah, we gravitate to people who are saying things that we say, yeah, we agree with that. We think the same way. I don't want that. I don't want people. I hate these panels that we are given now. The opening panel tonight is, who cares? Give me the news. When CNN first came on, they had headline news. They still, I think, do have headline news, but it's not. I want all news radio on television. I want just information. What is going on? I don't care what you think or he thinks or she thinks. So what? It gives you some additional information, but I watch also the Black News Channel. We got Black Lives Matter coming up. I want to know what's coming in from that source. I want left, right, I want center, I want everything I can get. And I'm a smart guy. Trump tells us he's smart too, but magna cum laude, all that stuff. I got a brain. I got a brain. I'd like to use that brain to read everything and say, I trust that the sources, certainly on the left, because I worked for those sources. I worked for, CBS and UPI and so on as a news person. And I trust it. And I know that the people who are gathering, because I know some of the people who are out there gathering the news, they're not making this stuff up, which is what Trump would have us believe. And people on the left, on the right, rather, would have us believe wrong. I believe every bit of that. Because I know they're actually correcting.
When you're doing the news, have you ever had a piece of copy handed to you and you read it and you said, I can't read this? Have you ever like, gotten to the point where you just felt like what you were reading just was, obtrusive to what the truth should be?
No, because I wasn't given copy. I wrote the copy. I
So, all right,
wrote my own newscast.
Let's change that question. So when you were writing copy, were there subjects, were there news stories that you tried to, that you ever wanted to avoid because you felt, this is too controversial for CBS or for UPI or any of the outlets that you were working for?
Yeah, of course. Look, you get the wires, the Associated Press, UPI, or Reuters, whatever it might be. You pull the information off and you make your determination. I want this story, that story, and here's the order that it's going to be in. Do you see things on there that you say, this doesn't make any sense? Yeah, of course. And you just disregard that. You get rid of that. That's not. So you have the option of
not having. You have the option of not reporting it. You could put it aside and leave it be.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. Absolutely. I mean, I've never been given. Here's your script. Go read it as your newscast. No. You're right. And somebody was talking before about Walter Cronkite. Cronkite wrote his newscast. He had, out of the whole half hour, he had about 7.5 minutes. And were there people who contributed to that? Yeah. But he went through and he put his input in. It wasn't just reading the words of somebody else. Cronkite was a journalist. He knew what he was doing. And that came across on the air, which is part of why he was trusted.
Interesting point. Very good point. Jeffrey Rose.
May I add?
Okay, sure. Before we bring Jeffrey,
I want to add one more quick point, though. And Jeffrey, then you can comment on this and whoever else. One more quick point, which is there bias? Of course there's bias simply in the words you choose when you write a news story. Part of you goes into it. That's true. So we should not forget about that. There's a certain amount of bias every one of us brings to a news when we write a news story. If I say riot or disturbance, for example, two different words, one has a very different hit than the other word has. And I'm sorry to interrupt you there.
No, that's a very good point. I'm glad you interrupted me. Now I have Jeffrey Rose, who is a hypnotherapist, and he knows about the dissemination of information and how the use of words, the use of subliminal images, the use of just phrases like you're talking about can affect your decision making, whether it be voting for your next president or what you go and buy in the store. Jeffrey, why don't you get into your philosophy and what you know as an expert in this field to enlighten the viewer and to enlighten all of us?
Okay, well, I'd like to expand a little bit about what George has said, because when we're watching mainstream media, the limbic brain, which is activated, that's stimulated, and that's the part of the brain that's responsible for governing emotions, especially fear. And mainstream media does a great job of instilling that. Unfortunately, our neocortex, which allows us to think critically and rationally, that's not being stimulated. So we see these political headlines and stories in the mainstream media activating only the limbic and reptilian centers of the brain. Viewers aren't engaging in the neocortex. We're not thinking critically. We're not thinking rationally. And then, of course, mainstream media, they want their audience to blindly accept and support all the stuff that they're told. And then they'll use clever buzzwords like terror, extremism, let's say, to trigger all these specific fear-based emotional reactions. The problem is, we're very suggestible. Human beings are very suggestible, and it's easy to control. Control us when we're in a state of fear. And of course, media wants audience. They want more people listening because they make more money advertising. They're not just going to just report the news when you could do interesting commentary and then just use all these fear-based words,
So guys, ask Jeffrey anything that you want to ask about this, because it's not just me here. You're all contributors. So anything that you want to ask Jeffrey that might add to the conversation.
Well, I'll ask Jeffrey. Jeffrey, do you think that the way that people write the news and produce the news, they're aware of what you're saying, or do you think it's a byproduct of what you're saying?
It's a good question. I would think it depends on the individual. I think they'd always think about the audience and using colorful words. So, anytime you could put in, just phrase it with a word that instills some kind of fear, gets you excited, gets you aroused, gets you emotional, sad or happy, you're going to use that. It's colorful. People are listening. They're emotional. They're having feelings, and they're going to keep watching us over and over. They're not there just to critically think and say, I don't know, does that make sense? Or how should we think about that? And you just get reactive. And then you want to just keep watching and get other people to watch and share your viewpoints, which are amplified because of your own confirmation bias. And news does that. You know.
All right. Now, I want to ask you, now I'm going to segue to another subject, and I'm going to read another statement. Not since the 1960s has America been so racially and morally divided. With all that's gone on, Charlottesville, George Floyd, assaults on the gay community, Trump's own racist comments for starters. Going back to the Trump being the symptom, not the problem, do you feel that America is a racist country?
I think that if you look at the history of white supremacy in the country and the Ku Klux Klan, there's been pretty much a through line about white Protestants wanting to keep the country as white and as Protestant as possible, thus not wanting Catholics, not wanting Jews, not wanting Black people. And that has evolved into the culture that is totally freaked out by the browning of America and immigration. It's difficult. A good friend of mine, Andy knows him, Harry Higgins, said it's very difficult for anyone to say they're truly not a racist because the definition is broad. But in terms of really discriminating, I think absolutely. And at the same time, you have to look at the other side of the coin, which is America is the most heterogeneous nation in the history of the world. This is a great experiment. And part of the great experiment of the great melting pot is white people not accepting the way it's going.
So can you have both at the same time? It's obvious that we can, that we can have the racism and then the open-mindedness.
I just add, my feeling is that with the passing of each generation, you're going to see a natural reduction in the number, the millions of people who are racist. Look at television commercials, for example. And there's an interesting thing in terms of suggestion. Most television commercials, when they show you a family, by most, I mean more than 50%, are essentially a blended family. Where look at The Bachelor. You couldn't have had, I could go into a personal example, but in the 60s or even the 70s, you would never have had a Black man and a white woman or vice versa dating on a television show. It just wouldn't.
You did Morton Downey Jr. and Mort broke all the rules. That's what made Mort so refreshing. He didn't give a shit. He just said it like it was.
No, that's not. Unfortunately, that's not.
Can I add something to that?
Like you thought you'd like hearing it was.
Yeah, Mort was a performer,
right?
And so he told it the way we told him to say it. That's my point about this whole thing, is that the people behind the scenes are the ones telling the people. And I take a little bit of an issue again with this Walter Cronkite thing. He's sitting in New York and he's writing about stuff happening in the Middle East. He can't know what he's writing it in his voice, but he has no idea really what's going on in the Middle East when he's sitting in the studio in New York. But I'll say this about the racism issue, and it's something that probably would resonate with this panel, which is that probably almost everybody on this panel, maybe not everybody, has some advantage of intergenerational wealth, that they're either going to give some of what they've earned to their children or had the benefit of getting something from their parents. And that's not the case with almost all people of color in this country.
Correct.
They don't have intergenerational wealth. They don't even know about it. They don't know it exists.
That's a great point, Andy.
Wow. And until we address income inequality in this country, and those of us, myself included, who have had the advantages of my parents and my children, the advantage that I've had, until we address intergenerational wealth in this country, where I can then live in a community where property taxes are high and therefore education is better, until we address that issue and the result of income inequality, this will be a racist country.
We have lost the middle class, and a lot of the middle class could be minority people. The middle class has shrunk. When I was growing up in the neighborhood where I grew up in Philadelphia, the man across the street was a milkman. He raised a family on a milkman's salary. His son went to Annapolis. His daughter went to a college. They weren't rich, but he earned enough money in that blue-collar profession to have a house and raise a family. Virtually impossible now in a comparable type job, delivery man of some kind.
Wow.
Yeah.
You're all talking about this. I grew up in a neighborhood called Rochdale Village in Queens. And in the 60s and towards the early 70s, we were a racially diverse community. Black friends and white friends and brown friends. And from people who were milkmen to construction workers to doctors to lawyers in all various stages of life. We grew up and we're known as the first generation, and that we had never known that there was a color difference. We knew your skin color was different, but we didn't know that someone didn't have based on their race. But then when you walk outside of that area, and then when you come out into I'll call the outside world, you realize that my friend who was black at the time didn't have the same things that were given to me on the outside as I was. So yes, are we basically racist and divided? We have been. We don't want to be, but we have been. As we're getting older and the younger generation, it's starting to blend. It's starting to move out of that more and more.
Media is helping. Media is helping.
Yes.
blending and helping to diminish racism.
Yes.
All right. I mean, now I want you to each to reflect on the last 4 years of your life as a member of the media and just as a person trying to do their job every day and living their life. I want you to reflect on what was the most difficult time for you during those 4 years and why. Let's start with George. Bottom up.
The most difficult period for me during the last 4 years was the last 4 years. It was the sense that America was falling into an abyss of stupidity, an abyss of violence.
But you personally, not a political commentary, but you personally.
But I'm experiencing that too. That's what's going on. That's what I'm reacting to. I mean, this has been an extremely difficult time. The news media was something we could not trust by definition. Fake news. Now, if you look at the MSNBCs and the Foxes and the CNNs of the world and so on, yes, you're going to have a lot of opinion. Opinion is not fact. Opinion is, I'm not saying it's fake. It's simply an opinion, but it's not news. You know, you've got to get a source of news that's reliable, but you can't have the overarching leadership of this country telling the world that what they're hearing and seeing and reading is simply not true by definition. Are there alternate facts? Of course there are. You know, I say the color of the sky is magenta, you say it's pale blue or whatever it might be. And two different opinions, how you see it, how I see it. There are alternative facts. One can be seen as correct, the other can be seen as correct. But what was being told to all of us during this time was that the news media could not be trusted. That was wrong.
Okay. Now, Andy, what about you? What was the most difficult period for you during these last 4 years?
Yeah, you know, I have to say, I think I've had it easy. I do have an answer, Jesse. I've had it easy. I have a job. My family's generally healthy. I have money to spend. And so two things. One is it's been very difficult to see other people struggling so mightily. And I've tried to do my part in helping some of those people. But still, I come home to my nice house and my generally healthy family. I've got food on the table and so forth. So it's been hard to watch that happen. And then the other part, over the last year, it's been hard to see that my kids can't live fully. My daughter's a senior in high school. And, you know, there's been no dates, no fun things with friends, no school activity.
This is the hardest part. You know, when they're at this age, they're emotionally evolving and they need that interaction.
Right.
I have twin girls.
Yeah. So just to finish the point, there's likely not going to be a prom. There may or may not be a graduation. So My son's been stuck at home, although he likes playing video games, so he's not quite as discerning. But it's been hard to watch all of us, but especially my kids, be shut inside for this terrible pandemic.
And Bill, what was the most difficult time for you during these last 4 years?
Well, actually, not making a joke, professionally, the most difficult challenge I was getting a publishing deal for my book. It took me several months, and I ended up getting a good deal. But in terms of the context and the germinating essence of the show today, Jesse, I think that I'm a bit of a sociologist. I was a sociology major at the University of Pennsylvania, and I got a master's in communication. And I would say the most difficult thing for me in the context of what we're talking about has been seeing the continued rising of anger in our society, anger, and the diminishment of civility in our society. If I look back, say, even into the 60s and 70s, I don't remember reading stories about someone getting shot because they pulled into a parking space, which I've read several stories about that, or road rage incidents where people are smashing. I don't remember that stuff from 30 or 40 years ago. The level of anger in the country has gone up, I think, enormously.
That's a great point, Bill. I agree.
For a lot of reasons. Not having enough money, feeling disadvantaged, a lot of the stuff we've been talking about on this show, the confirmation bias about things you're already angry at, getting more angry about it, and economic inequities, all of those things. Just looking at the George Floyd murder. My God, what could have been worse in the last 4 years than watching a policeman with his knee on someone's neck kill the guy for a living? That's horrible.
Yep, that's
anger.
That's anger, and that's also the symptom of the problem. So that's something that we need to think about.
Well, it's a symptom of racism, I would say, partly,
Yep.
and anger, just displaced anger. People get in their cars and they just start honking and giving you the finger. You're an asshole. And the same thing happens on the computers, on their internet. They'll just see something they don't like and go after it like that. So that's what has disturbed me the most.
No, that's a great point you're bringing out.
Thank you.
Jeffrey, what about you? What was you're a hypnotist, you're a therapist. What was the hardest? You're listening to people's problems. You're there to help them get out of those problems. So did the amount of problems intensify over the last 4 years?
Absolutely. I was dealing with a lot of people presenting with more stress than normal. And I have to say, admittedly, I felt that too. When Trump became our president, it was stoking fear before the election, then when he won the first time, and making that comment about the media being the enemy of America. Okay, the USA, the press is the enemy here, really hurt my baseline of stress. I wasn't feeling good. And I was kind of feeling embarrassed to be an American. And I think I said to you in the past, Jesse, that who America isn't what we think we are. And it's not what we think other countries think we are. It's actually what other countries think we are. And if you were to do a little poll and see what the attitude is toward Americans right now, it's shameful. Not now, but the last 4 years. So I was feeling quite uncomfortable, more stressed than ever. And I got some greater relief right now, even though we still have lots of anger, lots of animosity. And of course, everyone's looking, with that confirmation bias. They're going to keep trying to feed their beliefs. So they're going to be angry at the left if you're right. If you're right, you're going to be angry at the left. So, it's uncomfortable.
All right, a final question before we close the show. And this is a really important question. I want to get a view of the future from all of you. Do you think, now that we have a new president, a new administration, that we're going to be any happier in the next 4 years? Because if we're not, you know who's coming back for more.
I think, go ahead.
Will we be happier? It seems that when the election was over, it was like a big relief for many people. My thinking is we've lost the compromise, the art of compromise.
Oh, that's
so maybe with this fresh air, sort of say, maybe we learn how to compromise again and move out from here in the next 4 years.
George?
Okay, yeah. I'm going to go back to one thing, and this is looking forward to this administration. One of the things that is happening, we saw it in George Floyd, the rise to the forefront, of course, with the cell phones and cell phone video of citizen journalism, which I think is going to become more and more important. If that young woman, I don't know her name, the one who photographed start to finish the killing of George Floyd, the 8 minutes and 46 seconds or 42, whatever it was, of that officer's knee on that man's neck, that is what made it. That is journalism. That is true journalism. That we now have the ability to record everything for posterity, but also for accuracy in reporting today. It's impossible to dispute what people are saying about that police officer and what he did because we saw it. There's no disputing it. So I think that citizen journalism is going to become far more important as the years go on and as technology improves.
All right, fellas, this has been a really amazing conversation. I really enjoyed everybody's point of view. I think that we got a lot of the issues out in the open. I thank you for being on The Alarmists. I thank you for being so open-minded to talk about this. It's not easy. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, George. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brad, wherever you are. You keep coming in and out. Thank you, Jeffrey. Ladies and gentlemen, you've seen part 2 of Let Freedom Ring on The Alarmists, Conspiracy Theories and Coffee. Thank you for joining us tonight. Stay well. Keep the faith.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, everybody.
Jess. Good being on.
Bye.